Last time we were talking about security and other aspects of information systems, and I will very quickly revise the last transparency which we had on the system. Now we are talking about primarily the requirement for recovering from disasters. Now, one way of recovering from disasters, I said, was to have a backup, that is backup every day incremental, or that is whatever changed that day, and backup every week, and so any given day if there is any failure you can go up to the previous day and take the whatever happened in a particular day and get back to where you were. This is all right if you can afford to have, say, a few hours of disruption of service, but there are certain situations where you cannot afford to have any disruption at all. Let me take an example. Many of the airline reservation systems and railway reservation systems and so on work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they cannot really tolerate any kind of a disruption in service, because disruption, particularly in airlines reservation system, could mean that they lose a lot of customers, because there are many competing airlines. If one airline system does not work, the customer will automatically go to another airlines and maybe book there. So, you have lost an opportunity. And there are certain banking transactions which are always online, particularly if you are transferring large amounts of money from one bank branch to another bank branch. This is currently also available in India. For instance, State Bank of India has got something called anywhere banking. So, they have a unified numbering systems for all accounts in all banks, almost all banks, excluding some of the rural banks. There is all the metros and also including places like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Trivandrum, Cochin and so on. All the computerized branches, they have, many of them have been identified, fairly large number have been identified as anywhere banking. That means you can encash your check, giving the check in any branch of State Bank of India, anywhere else in India, which is going to a branch which has got anywhere banking. Similarly, they have also, if you want to transfer a certain amount of money to another account of a friend in living in a different city, you just have to go to the bank and give the account number of that friend and give details about the transactions to be made, and this branch will enter that transaction in their computer, and automatically it will update the accounts of your friend in a bank elsewhere. In other words, it is almost at a touch of a button money is being transferred. While money is being transferred and so on, you have to be careful that if there is a breakdown somewhere and there is a possibility of duplicate transfer or mistransfer. So, these things require particularly some kind of a mirroring. In other words, the same transactions are carried out in another site which is called a mirror site. That is, every transaction which is carried out in a major bank or major airlines reservation system is duplicated in another centralized system elsewhere, so that even if there is a disaster in one place, then the mirrored system will automatically take over. In other words, every transaction having been mirrored, that means repeated elsewhere, there is no disruption at all in service. because you smoothly transfer from one computer which may have failed or may have been affected by a disaster, like say a flooding system and so on, and so take it over to another place. Okay. In fact, some of the banks, for instance, who have such systems, they may have one site in Mumbai and another mirroring site in a place which is maybe even far away. It could be even in Chennai, because communication speeds are now fairly high, and communication speeds are going up every 9 months. It is doubling. Okay. So there is it doesn't really matter where the actual computer is situated, because the speed at which data travels over fiber optic lines is at the speed of light, and so there is no real time lag between any transaction happening in any given branch and that transaction being mirrored in a so-called mirror site elsewhere. Okay. So this is what is done in highly, what I would say, a system which should not ever be interrupted. In such a system, this mirroring is always done. So mirroring is an expensive affair, because you got to have a duplicate system, you got to run that also 24 hours a day, and you have to keep it up to date, and every transaction is being duplicated. That means double the cost, plus the communication cost, and plus the manpower cost, and so on. So you don't do it lightly. You do it only for situations where you just cannot tolerate any disruption at all. Only in such cases such mirroring of transactions are done. But you have to be you have to ask your customer. If you are actually developing a system for a customer, you have to ask the customer, how critical is it? Can your business survive if there is a, say, a few hours delay? Can your system survive if say how long can it survive? Suppose you are disrupted for few days, many businesses cannot survive at all. If some businesses can survive if you are disrupted for a few hours or even a day, but some others just cannot afford to have any disruption whatsoever. So that is where you go to the mirroring. Otherwise you can do a backup and use a backup and return back to the system with the backup copy and restore it, because restoring with a backup may take a few hours. Okay. Apart from that, there are many places where there is a physical security, physical locks. In other words, the locks are actually not electronic locks, but physical locks with a key and so on, and they also have a surveillance system, that means a video camera, which captures every person who enters that particular secure area and does any kind of a transaction on a computer. So physical locks, along with a system to record whoever entered and so on, is put. For instance, in Bangalore, there is a big data center which is run by Reliance Communications, and they let out areas in that data center for banks to put their machines, because they guarantee 24/7 service with uninterrupted power supply, air conditioning, security, and so on. A centralized data center where you hire out space to various organizations. Primarily, banks like to have this, because banks cannot afford to have a complete setup in their own premises because of various reasons, including the reasons of security, about power supply and things of that type. So they provide, you might say, cages or say cubicles for many banks to put their machines. Obviously, banks do not want somebody else to enter their computer area and do anything with their machine. So they have a physical lock and a electronic surveillance system. There is a little camera or eye looking at the anybody who enters, and when somebody enters, the time at which he entered, and what he did internally, they're all logged. So once you pass a physical lock, you have a password system. There is an electronic lock for getting into the machine, that is on the terminal. You got to have a password, and also biometric authentication. As I said, fingerprint, for instance, fingerprint recognition is there. So you put your fingerprint on a little scanner, it reads that and then checks it against authorized fingerprints and allows you in provided your fingerprint matches. So that way they can have an audit trail. They can trace who changed some data at what time, and they can prove it in a court of law because there is a picture. There is a biometric authentication. So these are precautions you always really take. In fact, nowadays biometrics have gone much further. They even have something called iris recognition systems. That is, when you look at your eyes, every person's eye has got a very special set of red lines emanating from the pupil, and so those sets of lines are distinct, and so you don't have to really even put your thumb. You just sit in front of the machine. There is a camera which looks at your eyes and says whether you are authenticated or not authenticated. Okay, so biometric systems are also continuously advanced because some people don't like to put their thumb impression. But the point really I am trying to make is that when you run such common facilities like a data center, you have to really take care of the issues of security with all possible methods, including physical lock, electronic lock or password system, and also biometric, so that you say, as I said, prevention is better than cure. So this will essentially put a certain kind of fear in a person before he does anything, because he knows he is being watched, and whatever is being done, whatever he is doing, particularly with a critical database, is being trailed and the record is being kept. So an audit trail is there. Now apart from that, encryption of sensitive data, particularly things like credit card numbers and lots of other critical data are normally encrypted and stored. So even if somebody, particularly a hacker or somebody, gets hold of it, he will not be able to interpret it because of the fact that is encrypted. Unless you have the key for the encryption, you cannot decrypt it. So again, identifying all persons who read and modify data. And you have to, while keeping all these prevention measures, you also have to train employees on data care, handling and security. In other words, don't allow your employees to carelessly reveal some data such as password and things of that type. And also employees, when they enter such secure areas and particularly deal with things like credit card numbers and other critical data, they are not allowed to take in even a scrap of paper or even a mobile phone, because they can note down some numbers there if it is unencrypted, and then they can come out and use it. Or they are not allowed to take any floppy disk out of the room or pen drive and things of the type. So they are actually searched in doing this. Of course, anyhow the camera is there, it's always looking at you. Okay, and so the kind of frauds which occurred in banks where a new employee was able to get hold of credit card numbers and defraud up to the extent of $500,000 just shows sheer carelessness on the part of the bank in having proper security measures in place. As a responsible systems designer, you should really make sure that when critical data is there, they are encrypted, or you don't allow any method of kind of taking that data out without a supervisor's consent. I mean, in other words, even a supervisor cannot take the data out. The data has got to be in the machine, okay, and that has got to be done with great amount of care. And I also said that in any machine which is connected to the internet, a virus is always a problem. So you always put antivirus software, but antivirus software has got to be continuously updated because new viruses come all the time, and unless you have updated antivirus software, which is almost, sometimes you have to update almost every second day, it may turn out that some new virus comes and attacks it. Of course, normally the antivirus software people try to catch viruses early, and then they try to kind of update their antivirus software, and it's always available online on the internet, so you can download it and in fact have a continuous check. Okay. And this is also called firewall protection to prevent unauthorized access to your computer of people who don't have any authority, and also certain amount of certain methods whereby the presence of various types of computers in an organization is shielded by the firewall. I will talk about the firewall in slightly greater detail when we talk about electronic commerce in the next set of lectures. So I think I will not get into great detail about firewall, but there is effectively another computer which makes sure that unauthorized people don't enter your local area network or your intranet and do anything which is illegitimate there. Data security, as we said, there are three different terminologies which is used in relation to the care of data. One is security, which we have been talking about. There are two other issues. One is called privacy, and third is called integrity. Data security, data privacy, and data integrity are related, but they are kind of independent. Security is a necessary condition for privacy, but it is not sufficient for privacy. We will see why. Okay. Data security is concerned with protecting data from erasure, theft, unauthorized access, unauthorized modification, and so on. That is what we have been talking about. And also, of course, security is concerned with preventing disasters, and even if disasters occur, try to kind of recover from disasters by various means. Okay. Privacy is concerned with protecting data regarding individuals from being accessed and used without permission or knowledge of concerned individuals. Some of those data, like credit card data, of course, is something which is financial implications, and that has got to be kept secure. Apart from that, of course, privacy is more important in certain areas where you might not say that it makes much of a difference, like for instance medical records of individuals. Medical records of individuals is should be protected from others. In other words, it is a private matter about one's health and one's what kind of medicines the person is taking. It should not be common knowledge. Okay, and so this is a privacy concern. Privacy concern is things like your medical information, your bank balances, and your financial transactions. All these are have to be kept private to you and not revealed to anybody and everybody. Okay, this privacy is something which is conceptually, it is somewhat different from security, in the sense that this separate laws are actually implemented in many countries to protect the privacy, because the privacy is lost, you essentially you are somebody is kind of peeping into your life, and that is something which is not allowed, and privacy is highly valued, particularly in the Western cultures, and they are very, very wary about others knowing about their private affairs. Okay, and so the issues are in terms of, in fact, enacting laws. Many countries have enacted privacy laws to make sure that companies do not reveal information about you without your knowledge. Take a simple example. When you subscribe to a magazine, okay, you give your name and your address, and sometimes they ask for your phone number. You give all that, and when you give that, if they use that information to sell that information, say for instance, to others, for instance, for sending ads to your house by mail, or phoning you at all odd times saying that open an account with our bank or start this insurance and things of that type, that means your privacy has been lost, and that has been lost because somebody who has the data about you is selling that data without your consent. Okay. So, very often nowadays they have a little column which says, do you have any objection to revealing your data to other people who may be interested in sending you some valuable information, and very often you have to tick no, because if you tick yes, you are essentially opening yourself to a flood of uncalled for junk mail. Whole lot of junk mail will come, that is useless mail will come which will waste your time, just like whole lot of junk or spam will come on your email if you reveal your email address, and all types of useless stuff will come to your email address. Okay. So, it is very important. If the privacy law is there, then there is a compulsion on the part of the company not to reveal the information such as telephone number, email ID, your actual postal address and stuff like that. Okay. So, privacy is concerned with that. Integrity is concerned with the quality and reliability of raw as well as processed data. So, integrity is at a higher level. In other words, security is something where you let me take a very simple example. See, if you have a very good lock and lock up a lot of material inside a box, you can say that the material is secure, but the material inside the box is useless from the point of view, that means it is deteriorated or something like that, and it cannot really be used. It is not there is no integrity in that. In other words, the quality of that material, even if you provide, if you kind of break the lock and get it, it is not much use. Okay. So, the integrity is concerned with the quality and the reliability of whatever is the processed information. Okay. So, security is something else. Okay. Does not imply privacy or integrity. Integrity is one level higher in terms of quality control, reliability and so on. Privacy controls, as I said, requires laws which has got to restrain people from revealing your personal data. Ultimately, system security and integrity are very important. Okay. So, this is essentially the end of this particular discussion about security, about audit, and about generally I talked about audit information systems, security information systems, trailing transactions and so on. These are important in terms of designing any information system. So, whenever you design a system, you got to keep this in the back of your mind while designing. Now, we will go to another topic, and the other topic is electronic commerce. And one might wonder, why would I talk about electronic commerce in this course on systems analysis and design? The primary reason why I have included electronic commerce in this systems analysis and design course is because more and more our systems are now based on the internet and the World Wide Web. The days of an isolated computer where you designed a system and implemented for a company are gone. Now, within a company, computers are all connected. So, there is an intranet. Intranets are connected to other intranets, there are extranets, and there is an internet. All these we talked about in the earlier module. Okay. But the point is that because of the fact that electronic communications has become so fast, inexpensive, and computers are all connected together on the network, nowadays information systems cannot be designed for systems in isolation. You have to design it for systems which are essentially internet connected or internet enabled or intranet enabled. So that is the reason why I am going to be talking about this topic. I will again come back to this question of why we should learn about electronic commerce in greater detail later on. But this module will first define what is e-commerce, and in e-commerce you have got to be able to interchange data between organizations. So what is electronic data interchange, and particularly in internet, the issue of security becomes very, very important, because internet is something which is accessible to a lot of people, hackers, even your home computers connected to the internet. So anybody and everybody can get into the internet. So security takes on a lot more importance, and there is a question of payment. In fact, many of the e-commerce applications today require payment. Like if you want to book a ticket for the trains, you can book it from your home using the internet, or that is one of the e-commerce applications, and you have to pay for the ticket which you bought. And how do you pay for it? Okay, these are issues, and payment itself has got very different aspects. Like there are, as you know, you have check payments, you have credit card payments, you have cash payments. So you have to mimic all the three: check payments, credit card payments, and cash payments. All three has to be somehow mimicked in the electronic commerce world. And I'll give you a glimpse of this, because if I go into details of every one of them, it will take a whole course. In fact, in the curriculum, normally electronic commerce is given as an elective course, maybe in the third or fourth year of your BE course, or you are doing MCA, maybe in the second or third year of your MCA course. Okay, so this will only again give you a bird's eye view or overview of what electronic commerce is all about. So what we will learn is what are the basics of electronic commerce, the advantages and disadvantages of electronic commerce, what is the architecture of electronic commerce system. That means how is the electronic commerce system organized and put together. That is what I mean by architecture, particularly ease of use and things like that. And electronic data interchange, the need for security, and how electronic payment systems work. These are the points which we have talked about. With the emergence of the internet and the World Wide Web, new methods of carrying out business transactions using the World Wide Web have begun to explode. As I said, nowadays no computers in isolation, and e-commerce, electronic commerce, emerges as a very important application of the World Wide Web. In fact, without the World Wide Web, e-commerce cannot be there, and e-commerce is a very, very important part of the web. Okay. And today, as I said, it is very difficult to find an isolated computer. Computers are all connected, and intranet and internets are there, and extranets between cooperating organizations. It's cheaper to carry. See, this is very important. It is cheaper and faster to carry out business transactions within an organization and among organizations electronically using the network connection, because the electronic connection makes communication extremely fast. See, earlier on we used to depend on the postal service, courier service, and so on, and written documents which float from place to place. When written documents come, very often they got to be re-entered, and of course there is a delay in transit in the post. For instance, there is a lot of difference between, for instance, email communication to America today goes instantly. See, you send an email, within about a couple of minutes the recipient has it. Whereas if you post a mail to him by postal system, even if it may be airmail, it will take at least a week to 10 days, and if you go through a very expensive courier, it may take at least 48 hours, because physically the plane has to go there and your document has to be delivered. So electronic speeds are so fast that, and also so cheap. Electronic mail is almost no cost compared to an aerogram, which costs you 15 rupees to mail, okay, or courier, which costs hundreds of rupees to mail. So the point really is electronic mailing system and commerce system is so fast and so cheap that the cost of doing business and the productivity of your business goes up when you adopt this electronic means and go away from the earlier means which depended upon the postal system or the courier system and so on. So that's important to understand how business transactions are carried out electronically, reliably and securely, because these are two keywords. See, because when you go to electronic world, you have to be worried about security and also reliability, because reliability in any case is important for any system. And when designing information system, it is essential to understand the emerging web-based transactions. In other words, the transactions today between companies are on the internet, and so they are using the World Wide Web. And there are also certain things which are emerging called web services. Certain services, like even for instance a word processor or a spreadsheet or an accounting package, may be available as a web service. So you effectively go and use that service, and as of now some of those services are free of cost, but as times go by, those services will also be costed, and you may end up paying for that service at some cost depending upon how much you used it, okay, what facilities you used and so on. So there is a certain certain kind of a difference which is taking place, or transformation which is taking place in the way business is being done. So also some transformation is taking place in the way in which computers are also being used, okay, and so there is a whole lot of new systems that are coming up which are based on so-called web services, and many of the companies in India today which do outsourcing work and so on effectively use the web services model, and for many of the applications, primarily because of the fact that once you get to the web and so on, distance does not matter. Your customer may be in America or South America or anywhere in the world, but electronically the distance is almost zero, because the information travels at the speed of light. So business is going on, as Bill Gates puts it, at the speed of light, okay, very, very fast, okay, and so that is the reason why one has to be aware of this of these things. And a number of organizations are exploring how to carry out all day-to-day operations electronically using their intranet and so-called paperless systems. In other words, they don't want to have papers flowing from place to place to place. Rather than that, everybody has on a table a desktop system, or where a person is traveling is a laptop system, and even when you are traveling, the laptop system is connected by Wi-Fi or wireless high fidelity system to the internet, and he can get to his particular company by using the World Wide Web. So the point is that the machines being connected allows you to kind of look at data and transmit data without any interference from the without any paper transactions, and so this is much faster and cheaper. In fact, even governments now, in so-called e-governance initiatives, they are trying to kind of minimize the flow of files from one babu to the next babu and so on. So whatever files are there, they try to make a noting on the machine and then transmit that file to a database from which somebody else can access. So there are many systems which are emerging, because in government it has not yet come to some kind of maturity, because it takes a little bit of changes in the mindset as well as changes in the maybe basic laws, but with the emergence of so-called Right to Information Act, which allows public to have the right to look at all government information. It will be more or less for all government offices will be forced in the near future to have everything electronically available, so that anybody can kind of go and look at what reasons particular certain how the transactions which took place or all decisions which took place in certain government offices are transparent, that is known to the public. And once this Right to Information Act comes in, and then people can have access to data. Hopefully when they computerize everything, you can even have access to the data from your home using the government website. Once you have that, it is hoped that this transparency will put a certain amount of responsibility in the responsibility for bureaucrats and others working in government to be more responsive and be more careful about what they do. Okay, and one hopes that this will, in some sense, eliminate the delays, eliminate corruption, stuff like that. Okay, so there is definitely a very good opportunity of providing better transparency if you use electronic methods like e-commerce. E-governance is the other parallel thing. That is, commerce is regarding businesses, governance is regarding government offices. Okay, because we public has to deal with both companies and with the government. Okay, and it is just important for so students should really understand, particularly if you are designing information systems, you should understand this what it really means. Okay, so that is the reason why we are going to be talking about electronic commerce at a certain length. Okay, I am going to devote a few lectures to this. Okay, and as I said, even though it is not an entire coverage of the whole discipline in a very broad sense, it will essentially give you a very quick and good overview, I hope, so that you can be aware of where they fit into any kind of information system which you design. Okay, so I will define electronic commerce as sharing business information, maintaining business relationships, and conducting business transactions using computers connected to a telecommunication network. That is called e-commerce. The key terms here are, the sharing business information. There is certain kinds of, for instance, one business information which is shared is if you got, say, your price list, what goods are available at what price and so on. This information can be accessed by anybody to find out if he wants to kind of buy the item from you. If the competing businesses have this kind of information on their website, it will be easy for customers to decide where to go. Similarly, very often electronic companies like companies which sell integrated circuit and so on put all the data sheets on the web. So you can get hold of, if you are designing anything, you can go and look at the data sheet and use that for your design. So that is business information. You kind of look at business information which is relevant. Maintaining business relationships. What is meant by that is, if two businesses want to transact business between one another, one may be a vendor, one may be a purchaser. So the vendor and purchaser want to interact. So the interaction is enabled by the electronic commerce system. So maintaining such relationship between, say, vendor and customer. Conducting business transaction. There is the transaction in this case is that the purchaser sends a purchase order, and the purchase order goes to the vendor. The transaction is a purchase order, and that goes electronically to the vendor. And now electronically the vendor sends an acceptance if he accepts the order, and also gives some information regarding delivery time and stuff like that, cost, delivery time, and so on. And the purchaser acknowledges, saying that I have received it and now I confirm the order. Then the person goes ahead and sends the items to you physically, but along with it he will send electronic challan, you might say, by internet, saying that I sent it on this particular day, and this is the kind of data which it contains. So transactions are again carried out with this. Okay, and computers are primarily used in both cases. Both the vendor and the purchaser use computers. Both of them are connected to a telecommunication network, and this telecommunication network is of course the necessary network to interconnect machines. And normally internet, as I pointed out, particularly there are two different companies situated far apart. Telecommunication network can be a private telecommunication network, or it can be a public telecommunication network. Private network means you put your own leased line so that this leased line is not available to anybody to kind of intrude, or you may decide to use the public switch telephone network provided by the telecom provider, like in India BSNL or Reliance or Tatas and so on. Okay. This is called e-commerce, that is sharing business information, maintaining business relationships, and conducting business transactions using computers connected to the telecommunication network is called e-commerce. So this kind of encompasses all the points which are actually related to e-commerce. E-commerce is normally classified into three types. One is called business to business e-commerce. So people abbreviate it as B2B, and as usual computer people kind of have acronyms. They use shorthand, and TO has become 2. Okay, and one may like it or may not like it, but is stuck. Okay, B2B is effectively business to business, and business to customer. Business to business means two businesses are actually transacting some commerce or business between them using the telecommunication network. And business to customer means there is a business and there is a customer, and the customer is actually transacting some business with the company. Like it may be retailer may kind of give you the a customer, he may sell retail items on the net, like I will give examples of this. And then customer to customer is very interesting in the sense that if there are two customers, that means I am not a really retailer, in the sense that I don't sell things every day, I don't have a shop selling things, but I have something to kind of sell. I have a second hand radio, I want to sell the second hand radio or a second hand furniture to somebody who may like to buy it. So another person may be looking for a low cost radio, which is a second hand radio, or even a second hand car or a second hand furniture, and so the other person also sees this, and so now the two customers have to get together and decide on the price and decide on how to exchange the goods and money. Okay, this of course any two random customers may find it very difficult, because I have no way in which I could find out who has furniture to sell and so on. So new companies have come up which are called the middleman companies, like the eBay, and which essentially work as a go-between or a broker between two customers, and they charge brokerage, you might say, from both of them, from the buyer and the seller, which are both customers. So customer to customer e-commerce is also gaining a lot in terms of, because it allows you essentially have a worldwide customer base. You don't have to worry about a customer who is your neighbor, okay, provided of course it turns out that the items are easy to send across. Okay, if a very heavy furniture, your customer is in America, the cost of sending may be higher than the cost of the furniture. So the point really is, one knows, of course, what is the right way to do things. Okay, it's pure common sense. So retail stores, where retail stores like readiff.com is there in India, Amazon.com, which is a bookseller as well as music seller, which is a worldwide presence. Actually, it is an American company which is a pioneer in customer to business e-commerce, selling primarily started with books. Later on, they started selling music and stuff like that. And India, readiff.com came, and of course there is a site called indiabooks.com where you can go and buy books, primarily Indian publications, and you don't have to go to, because it's good to go to an Indian publication, because the time to get your book, if it is published in India, will be much shorter to go, if you get it from an Indian e-commerce site rather than going to America. Similarly, Printosol India, which publishes a lot of books, they have their own site, phi.com. So you can go to phi.com if you want to buy any Printosol book. If you want to buy any Printosol India book, you log on to the website and ask for the book, and then they'll give you the price and how much it will cost, postage and so on. And also they will say that if you buy so much, the postage will be waived and stuff like that, because that is what their website will tell you. The point is, it's a question of business, like a publisher or a bookseller or a retailer in general, trying to sell goods to customers, and the advantage is that the customer can be anywhere. Particularly, for instance, bookstores are not found in small places. Large bookstores are only found in big places, and bookstores take a lot of space, and you cannot display every book. Whereas a retail bookseller on a web, he has electronic catalog, so he got a huge catalog of books without having to store it physically. Once you order it, he will kind of go to that particular publisher and buy it, and or ask him to send it to you directly, and then he'll do a transaction. In other words, he will effectively pay that person some money, and there will be some agreement between that wholesaler and the bookseller who is on the web. So the point I am trying to make is that the virtual bookshop on the web can, in theory, have infinite number of books without having to spend money on a physical space, whereas a real bookshop in a city is constrained by space. They cannot have all kinds of books, and it will be too uneconomical for them to store them, because it's all dead stock as far as they are concerned. If it does not sell, that means it is a dead stock. See, so the point really is that slowly a lot of books are being bought on the web. Of course, bookstores still exist for different reasons, including people who would like to go and kind of browse, look at the feel of the book, and kind of read the book and stuff like that, and read randomly and decide whether you want to buy it or not. So there is, of course, both of them will exist, coexist. One will not vanish and the other will completely take over, but then it will turn out that a fair amount of customers who were primarily earlier forced to go to a bookstore, and people in remote areas did not have access to good bookstores, they also have a chance now to be able to get to a bookstore which has got a huge amount of data collection. There is huge number of book collection and their catalog, and you can order from their catalog. Now auction sites are the ones which kind of it's for customer to customer e-commerce. In other words, you kind of put your item. Suppose you have a second-hand radio on sale, you say I want 200 rupees for that, and the seller may not be willing to pay 200 rupees. So he will say I will give 100. Some other customer may give 150. So that's kind of an auction, and whoever bids highest, okay, gets that. And the auction site is the broker, you might say, which eBay is a typical example of this kind of a broker who kind of works between the between two customers, okay. And cooperating businesses, placing orders and paying invoices and so on, which I talked about. There is the B2B. This is B2B, this is C2C, this is C2B. You can, if I read from left to right, I will say B2C, C2C, and B2B. Okay. Electronic banking is essentially, it's also something like a B2C. The bank is the business, and the customer is the actual account holder. That's one. Electronic banking can also be a B2B, because there are two banks which want to transact business between themselves. Like for instance, there is a so-called electronic transfer of money from one bank to another bank. So these two banks should be connected, and money transactions can take place, interbank transactions can take place. Then it becomes a B2B. Okay. Booking cinema tickets, trains, and so on is another B2C commerce. Okay. In fact, in India today, the largest earner in e-commerce with the largest revenue is the IRCTC website maintained by the Indian Railways for railway train booking. They find that they are literally selling crores of worth of tickets on that, using that website. Okay, and payment is primarily by credit card. Okay, and so the train booking effectively has become a very large B2C kind of an operation. And apart from that, of course, even nowadays, even state transport companies, bus companies have a booking. And of course, airlines companies, particularly cheap airlines, inexpensive airlines like Deccan Airways, they have only electronic ticketing. They don't really provide any kind of physical ticket in the sense of your beautifully printed ticket, which is provided by the more expensive airlines. Okay, you can, in fact, there is no cost to them, because you print your ticket on your own computer. Okay, and take that to the airline office. So in fact, many of the other airlines are also started doing electronic ticketing, because it's an inexpensive way of selling tickets, and you don't have to pay the intermediate agents and stuff like that. Electronic publishing. There is publishing is where you effectively suppose you want to write a book and make that book be available to a lot of people. Instead of going to a print publication, you can do create a Word document of your publication and put it on your website, and people can just look at it. Okay, because the question of payment is a different issue altogether. But you can in effect, if you have got a book which is of not great interest to a lot of people, you may like to put it and make it available in your website. Of course, there are now things like blogs and so on which are there. There is primarily private logs, that is, your diaries more or less, or your thoughts and so on. And this is of course not enabled by the internet, but I won't really call it commerce in the sense of electronic commerce we are talking about. This is filing tax returns is government department. Like today, you can file your income tax return using the World Wide Web, and that is essentially an example of customer to government. Customer being the taxpayer and government being the tax collector. Say customer to government, government to government, all this, just like B2B. There is also another set called G to C, C to G, G to G, and things like that. Okay, and so when governments come into the picture. Okay, but today in India, of course, the filing of tax returns is possible using the internet. Let us just take an example of business to business e-commerce. Okay, so there is two businesses. Each one has got a local computer network, their own intranet, and the other business which wants to cooperate with this business also has a local intranet. So you can call it business 1 and business 2, and they are interconnected by a PSTN, private public switch telephone network, or the leased line, okay, depending upon how much transactions these people carry out. If they are carrying out a lot of transactions and the privacy is very important, there is security is very important, more than privacy, in fact security is very important, they don't want anybody to intrude, and then they effectively put a private or leased line which is not accessible to anybody else, okay, and that is more expensive. So it depends upon how many transactions these people carry out between among themselves, and what is the importance of security and stuff like that. But today, of course, a trend is more and more going towards public telephone network using some encryption for communication, primarily because using the public switch telephone network is much less expensive. It is inexpensive. It's inexpensive compared to having a leased line. So one goes towards essentially I might say a PSTN with some security embedded onto it. Okay. So local LAN of businesses would normally follow a TCP/IP protocol of the internet, and of course I called it, of course, corporate intranet. We discussed it earlier in another module. So this is one intranet, this is another intranet, they connected, and when they connected, this is called the extranet. You have an extranet here. There is connections between two intranets of two different companies. So giving an example of purchase, taking a purchase order. Suppose there is a question of vendor and purchaser. Purchase order entered by the purchaser in its PC and electronically dispatched to the vendor by email. Okay. So you see, everything is electronic. So you don't have any paper document. You send it electronically. That is, you enter it on your computer and send it as an email attachment, you might say, to the vendor. And vendor acknowledges electronically the order. So the order acknowledgement comes right away, again as an email transaction. And vendor dispatches goods physically and delivering out electronically to business 1, which I talked about earlier. And business 1 can compare delivery note against order. Both are in computer reviewed form. Because both are generated by the computer, you can compare them by computer. So it is very, very fast. There is no manual comparison. And discrepancy note, if any, can be immediately sent to the vendor. In other words, there are two different types of delivery notes. One which comes electronically, the other will come with the actual physical goods, which will be normally a paper. But nowadays, if you are sending a lot of goods, what you do is you give to a truck driver a floppy containing the entire you might say the challan containing all the items that are being sent. So in which case it is electronically coming, and you can actually read it on your computer and compare. Okay. And all business 1 can carry out all local transactions using their own LAN. Local transactions are inventory update by stores, advised accounts to pay for goods taken into stock. Accounts can make payment electronically to the vendor. So these are the major kind of advantages, because each business can carry out their businesses in their intranet, and then they two businesses can communicate very effectively, and this will lead to a lot of requirements, and these requirements are types of electronic data interchange, payment systems, and all those which really constitute the heart of e-commerce. And I am going to talk about this in great detail in the succeeding lectures. Thank you.